Hello everyone. Today's topic is reference. There are a lot of terms here that are used to discuss reference as a key concept, but they are also terms that are useful for discussing language generally. So I think you'll find that although there are, as I said, numerous concepts here, they're very useful for a broad range of discussions of language and analyses of language. So reference itself, as it says here, words that make reference to something else for their interpretation. So here's some examples, which is probably the easiest way to start, right? Now, at the top here, it says personals, demonstratives, and comparatives. These are three subcategories of reference. We'll come back to that later. Let's look at some examples. So three blind mice, see how they run, see how they run. Here, we're talking about the word they. Think about how the word they means something here, but in a different text, it would mean something else, right? We always know that they has that meaning of two or more somethings, and it's a subject pronoun, right? It's not them, in which case it would be the object. So we have a little bit of information about they, two or more of something that are the subject of something. But every time we use they, it can mean something else. It can be, the word I used in the previous slide was interpreted. Every time you hear the word they, you have to interpret it in that particular case. What does they mean this time? So that's where we can use the word interpreted. In this example, they is interpreted as meaning the three blind mice that were just mentioned, right? Three blind mice, see how the three blind mice run. See how the three blind mice run. So that's a very clear, I think, example of a reference, right? They is a reference. Dr. Foster went to Gloucester in a shower of rain. He stepped in a puddle right up to his middle and never went there again. Now he works just like they. He means Dr. Foster in this case. In another case, it could mean some other person, right? We know he refers to a male, human, sometimes animal, right? People use he for their dogs and so on, but it always refers to something different in each text. That he, just like they, those are both called personal references. They're generally used to refer to people, or in this case with the three blind mice, animals. They're called personal references because they often refer to people, but in many cases they can refer to other things, right? But it's just the name is personal. But in the second example here, Dr. Foster went to Gloucester in a shower of rain. He stepped in a puddle right up to his middle and never went there again. The demonstrative in this case, the demonstrative reference, is the word there. Think about how there, you have to, it refers to something else, right? If I say look there, you don't know where I'm talking about. I have to use some other information to help you interpret it. I might say look there and point, and now you can interpret that there means in the direction of my finger pointing, right? Whereas in this example, you know that there is interpreted as Gloucester. So demonstrative reference is a kind of, it's called that, a kind of verbal pointing, right? We use words like here and there to point at things. And there's more information coming, right? These are just the initial examples. Personal reference, they, he. Demonstrative reference, there. Finally, here we have, there were two wrens upon a tree, another came, and then there were three. A comparative reference is where you are comparing something to other things, but you need to know what the other things are in order to make the comparison, right? Look at this sentence, how it says, the second sentence of the third example. Another came. Now here, another what, right? You don't have any way, if you only had that second sentence, if someone said to you, another came and then there were three, you'd know that it was another something, but you wouldn't know what, because you wouldn't be able to compare that another to anything else. But of course, because you have the first sentence, there were two wrens upon a tree, you're able to interpret another here as another wren, right? So you're able to compare this another something and look back and say, we're talking about wrens. So briefly, those are the three types of reference, right? They're all words, they, their, another, where we know it means something, but depending on how we use it, it changes each time, right? It really needs more information. I mean, other words don't work that way, right? If you talk about a table, well, yes, a table can be, made of wood or made of steel and so on. And it could have, possibly 4 legs, possibly 6 if it's a hexagon, whatever. But a table is always reasonably easy to picture, right? Flat surface, legs. Whereas words like they and he and another, they can refer to anything, right? Depending on the text around them, they're very productive, right? Productive meaning they can be used in many, many ways. So that's what references are. Words where on their own, they have very little meaning and they're interpreted by looking at the words around them. Or, as I said, sometimes with the gestures, like me pointing and saying, look at that, right? You don't know what that is until I point, right? Okay, let's get some more details, right? So personal references I've just highlighted with color here, and demonstrative and comparative I've highlighted them with color, as I do sometimes to, I hope that makes it clear for when you're looking back at this later. The 3 blind mice, right? The term that's used is cohesion, right? We're talking about cohesion here. The fact that they on its own is, like I said, not much meaning. 2 or more of something. It's got to be cohesive, stick, right? Cohesion, cohesion means sticky, right? Things that are cohesive, stick together. A word like they needs to stick to something else in order to be interpreted. Otherwise, it just doesn't work, right? If I say something like, talk to him about that, you understand those English words, talk to him about that, but you can't fully interpret it because you don't know who him is and you don't know what that is in this particular example. So cohesion is the overall property of that stickiness that references have, and as we'll see, that other key concepts that we talk about have. All reference has the property of specificity or definiteness. You know that the they here means something very specific. The 3 blind mice, we've just been talking about it, doesn't mean some other 3 blind mice. If someone said 3 blind mice, see how they run, you're not going to look around for some other 3 blind mice. You're going to make the assumption that the interpretation is about the 3 blind mice that you've already seen or that have already been mentioned in this case. Now here's some very useful terms. I just gave an example of this when I said, look at that. What's the difference between the you and the he? Right? Remember, you can always pause, of course, to look at these yourself before you hear me talk about them. Some people prefer that style of learning, right? You in the first example and he in the second are both references. They're both personal references, right? They refer to people usually, although, as I said, sometimes other things. But what's different, right? So you see happy birthday to you, happy birthday dear Kazu, happy birthday to you. You know that in this case, you refers to Kazu. You get that from within the words, right? Within the text. It says reference inside the text. You look at the words and that's enough. Who is you? You is Kazu. How is that different from the second one? If we're singing for he's a jolly good fellow, who is he? Well, you don't know from those words who he is. You would know from outside the text. The text is all of the words together, right? If we're singing for he's a jolly good fellow, you would only know who he is by looking outside the text. If we're singing it and we're all looking at someone and he's just retired or it's his birthday or whatever reason we're singing it, you'll know from outside the text, he refers to that person there. So we have inside and outside of the text. The ones in the text, it sticks to something inside the text. Happy birthday to you, you sticks to Kazu. For he's a jolly good fellow, if you try to look in the text for something to stick that to, it won't work. You'll realize, oh, okay, he refers to that person that they're all looking at and smiling while he stands there embarrassed that we're all singing for he's a jolly good fellow. So you've got 2 kinds of reference in that way, inside and outside the text. Here are the formal names that you can use, right? You've got reference, it can refer to outside the text. This should be reasonably easy to remember, right? Exophoric reference. Exo looks like exit, right? EXO-EXIT for exit. Exophoric reference means it refers to the situation. It refers outside the text. So if I say, look at that, and I'm pointing, the word that, right? You can see that that is a reference. If you say something like, I didn't know that, you know that that means something, but you don't know what it means. If I say, did you hear that? You don't know what that means in this case. You know it means some sort of sound, some sort of news, but you don't know exactly what, right? So if I say, look at that, you can say that that is an exophoric reference. It refers to something outside the text. You can't discover what it means from the words. Something in the situation that we're in, right? Something in the, now you know this word, I think, to the context, right? The with the text. These are all different words that mean the same thing. They're all correct. You may prefer one over the other because you find it easier to remember. That's fine. Different people choose different terms based on which they think is most intuitive to remember, based on which they think is most accurate. You can use whichever one you like. That's fine, right? So if it's situational, if it's exophoric, if it's context, any of those will do, right? When I say, go talk to that guy, and I point, that guy is a situational reference. On the other side of the organizational chart here, you see textual or endophoric reference. Endo, think of the en meaning in, right? Endo, in the text. So those are the examples where three blind mice see how they run. With they, you know what it means by looking in the text and saying, they is the three blind mice. Most of the time, we understand references by looking backwards in the text. Or if we're listening to a text, text can be spoken or written. If we're listening to a text, we understand it by looking or listening, thinking back, right? So when you say, three blind mice see how they run, they is an anaphoric reference. They refers back to the three blind mice. That's much more common than the other one there that says cataphoric, where you have a reference, but you don't know what it means. You, the listener, or you, the reader, don't know what it means until later. It's the kind of thing that sometimes happens for effect when you say something like, listen to this. Now, this, you know, this is pointing at something. It means something, but you don't know what until I tell you what it is that I want you to listen to. So, listen to this. This is a cataphoric reference. You can't understand this until a bit later in the following text, either the spoken text or the written text. Sometimes I say spoken, sometimes I say written, sometimes I say both. All of these things apply to both, right? Here are some examples, right? I just gave this one, didn't I? Look at that. You can only understand what that is by me pointing, or maybe I nod my head, right? And I say, look at that. Or even if something, sometimes you don't need to point because, you know, if there's a big car accident while we're walking down the street, smash, and then I say, look at that, you'd probably assume I meant, well, what that is the most obvious thing to be asking you to look at the moment. A car crash is unusual, we're walking down the street, there are usual things, people, shops, and so on. I say, look at that. You'd say, well, what could that mean here? Probably the car crash that just happened. These are all exophoric references because you understand them by looking around or listening to what's happening in the world, not from the words. Here's what I just told you, situational, exophoric, same meaning, right? Anaphoric reference, looking back, right? I lost my wallet on the train. That made me angry. What made me angry? Losing my wallet on the train made me angry. This is an anaphoric reference. You don't even need to say endophoric. If it's anaphoric, it must be endophoric, right? It means in the text part, you can leave it out. It's like, I mean, you don't, if you say, she's a woman, he's a man, you don't need to say human, right? Woman means human, man means human. So once you say anaphoric reference, if you say that in sentence 2 is an anaphoric reference, it means it's in the text. So you can just leave out saying textual or endophoric reference. These are the most common type, right? Where we refer back to something, which is obviously very convenient. You don't have to keep saying the same thing over and over. Imagine if you had to say, if we couldn't use reference, you'd have to say, I lost my wallet on the train. Losing my wallet on the train made me angry. And then you'd have to say, ah, yes, losing your wallet on the train is really annoying, isn't it? And we could never, you couldn't just say, yeah, that sucks, right? You'd have to say, yeah, that's terrible. Or sorry, yeah, losing your wallet on the train is terrible. So the references are obviously very convenient. Looking forward, cataphoric reference, like I said, it's often used for effect with something like this to get people's attention. This is hilarious. And you're going, what's this? It's only forward in the text. Listen to the joke I heard. Ah, this means the joke I heard is hilarious. Listen to the joke I heard. But saying it twice like that sounds silly, right? The joke I heard is hilarious. Listen to the joke I heard. Whereas saying this is hilarious creates that small feeling of anticipation, right? I'm not saying it's a hugely effective method of luring you into listening, but we do it because we know it has some sort of effect, right? This can be understood by looking forward in the text, or looking in the sense that you're reading this on a PowerPoint, but listening forward or waiting forward in the case of an actual spoken language interaction, right? So it can be thought of as forward or backwards reading, or you can think of it as forwards or backwards in time in a spoken language interaction. Sometimes you can't tell, right? That must have cost a fortune. Is this exophoric or endophoric, right? Well, it would depend what's going on around it, right? I've just been on vacation in Tahiti, and then the A says I've just been on vacation in Tahiti, and then B says that must have cost a fortune. Well, this is endophoric. That here refers in the text, in fact, anaphoric, back in the text, right? B is saying a vacation in Tahiti must have cost a fortune. Whereas if the two people are looking at something on an expensive car, in this case, that must have cost a fortune, that means the car that we're looking at that we haven't actually mentioned. So you can't always tell, right? But you know this, you know when you're walking or riding on the tube or something, you hear people speaking English and you know all the English words, but you don't understand really what they're talking about. Someone says, so she told him about that again. You know all those English words, but you don't know who she is, you don't know who he is, you don't know what it was that she told him about, right? This is where it's useful to say, right? You know the meaning of these words, so she told him about that again. You know the meaning of these words, but you can't interpret them because you haven't heard what the people said before, right? You won't hear what the people say after. So that's a useful distinction between interpret and know. You know those words, but you can't interpret them in that little bit of text. More detail about personal references. So we have something like this. These words are the personal references, I, me, you, we, us, he, and so on, right? The pronouns, right? Pronouns is what they are. Personal references is what they do. There are different ways of describing language, describing grammar in this case. You know, pronoun, we know what it is, a lot of us, but it doesn't mean anything. Like, why is the word pronoun? Isn't as intuitive as saying it's a personal reference. What is the word we? Well, it refers, reference, to people, right? So that's why many linguists prefer the term personal reference to the term pronoun. Never mind the word head there for a second. So other personal references include these, mine, yours, ours, and so on. Its is a bit odd, right? We don't tend to use its as possessive, right? Is that the gray mouse's hole? Yes, that's its. It's kind of awkward. We probably say, yes, that's its hole. We don't tend to use it on its own like that. Now, can you see the difference between head personal references and possessive personal references? The possessive ones show that you possess something, right? That's yours, that's mine. The I, me, you, they just stand on their own, right? As the head, you know, like the head, we think of it metaphorically as the main part of the body, the controlling part of the body. It's the same with head pronouns. They're the standing on their own version of these, right? You just say, you and I should go, something like that, right? Head means that, right? That it's in this case, you might think of it as the base form, the basic form, whereas the possessive one shows that it belongs to you or her or whichever. Notice that asterisk sign before its, is that the gray mouse's hole? Yes, that's its. We often use an asterisk to show that something is unusual, maybe impossible, but maybe not impossible, because it's not like you can't say, yes, that's its, but it just sounds a bit awkward to most of us, so that asterisk is to show you that, to remind you, that, so that you don't read, say you're reading a book on linguistics, on language study, and you read something and you think, that doesn't seem right. Well, the person's telling you, yes, this is not, I didn't make a typo here. I meant to say this, and to show it as an example of something that's unusual or doesn't happen. The other kind of personal references are again the same forms, but just being used as modifiers, right? My, your, our, his, her, right? So you see how mine, you just say mine, that's mine. It stands on its own, that's mine. Whereas with my, you have to add something else, right? That's my book. That's yours, that's your book, right? It's just a different form, but you know it means the same thing, right? It shows possession. One has to be used with something, that's his bicycle. The other can be used on its own, that's his. Now in the case of his and his, they look the same. In the case of hers and her, they look different, right? The form of his and his is the same. The function is different though, because one has to function by itself, that's his, and the other functions with something, that's his bicycle. Hers and her, the form is different and the function is different, right? It's easier to identify. That's hers, that's her bike. One functions as a possessive, the other functions as a possessive modifier. Personal reference, right? What else have we got? Demonstrative then. Demonstrative references, the list is shorter, and I think you'll find that it's quite intuitive. Let's skip the words in black for a minute and just look, sorry, skip the words in bold and just look at the types, right? This, these, that, those are demonstrative references, and now and then are demonstrative references, right? This, these, that, those are called selective, as are now and then. You always, whenever you use this or that, you have to choose something. You might want to pause and think about that. How do you decide if you're going to say this or that, right? Or if you're using the plural, how do you decide if you're going to say or write these or those? What's the distinction you make? What's the selection you make? I won't pause because, of course, you can pause if you want to think about that. With this and that and these and those, you're making a selection in terms of proximity, right? We tend to use this and these for things that are close to us, right? You know, if I had my pen and I'd say, do you want this? And it's close to me, right? Whereas if it's over there, I'd say, can you pass me that? And I'd ask you to get me the thing that's over far away there, right? Why do I not have a pen handy? Well, anyway, right? Pair of glasses are handy, right? Do you want these? Can you pass me those? We do it like that. Compare that to the personal references. Which personal reference would you use to refer to glasses? You'd use it, right? Or perhaps, sorry, you'd say them, right? If I say, where are my glasses? I can't find them. Them refers to the glasses, but there's no selection. You don't know how close they are, right? Them means glasses, but are they close or far? Don't know. Whereas if you say, can you pass, you know, do you want to use these? Can you pass me those? You've made that, like I called it earlier, that form of verbal pointing. These pointing at something close, those pointing at something further away. Now and then is also selective, right? But it's a selection in terms of time. Now refers to time close to me, in fact, immediately. Then refers to, well, any other time except for now. It can be in the future, right? I'll see you then. It can be in the past. We had a good time then. The now and then only work as heads, right? Whereas this and that and these and those can be modifiers or heads. This, well, there's an example there, right? Do you want this? The red this is a head, right? You just say this, it's by itself. but it means something. Do you want this book? In this case, this modifies book. It still means something. It's still pointing at a particular book. Whereas now and then only function as heads. You can't say, I'll see you then time. We don't say, come here now minute, or something like that. We just say now and then on their own. We don't use them to modify anything else. One demonstrative functions as a modifier, but it's not selective. We use it to point at things, right? This and that, these and those kinds of pointing, right? Look at that, look at this. There's one that we use to point at things, but you don't know whether it's close or far. Otherwise, it functions the same. That's the, right? If I say, look at this or look at that, if I say look at this, you're going to look over near me. If I say look at that, you'll probably look away from me. If I say look at the book, you don't know if it's a book close to me or a book far away from me. It still points, but it's something specific, some specific book, but you don't know where it is. So that's why it says non-selective. Comparative reference. Now, there's a bunch here. Again, I'll just lay the names out for you at first, and you can always pause to read them if you want, and then I'll talk the way through them, right? Here we have this. Here we have this. Okay, that's all. So, comparative reference. We have two kinds of reference. Comparative reference. Some are general, some are particular. If you look at those examples, and again, you may want to pause and think for a while, can you determine the difference between the general comparisons and the particular comparisons? It's maybe easier to start with the particular comparisons. Think about when you use a comparative reference like taller. She's taller than me. You know that there are two things, there's always the two or more things being compared, right? In this case, it's two things, well, two people, she and me. She is taller than me. And you know how we're being compared. We're being compared in terms of our height, right? In terms of how tall we are. So you've got a comparison between her and me in terms of tall, right? And she is, in fact, taller than me. Think about that when you look at the general comparisons. You still have to compare an A and a B when you say something like similar, but you don't say what is being compared, right? You might say, I saw a similar film last week. Well, you know it's being compared. This film A is being compared to last week's film B. I saw a similar film last week. But what's similar about it? You haven't said anything particular. Are you comparing its length? Are you comparing how good it is? Are you comparing the genre, whether it's sci-fi or comedy or whatever? General comparisons, we know something's being compared, but you don't say what's being compared, right? When you say, this pen is different than that pen, you realize pen A and pen B are being compared, but what's different about them? The price, the color, the maker. One's an ink pen and the other's one of the paintbrush pens that my daughter likes to use, right? Don't know. Whereas whenever you say something better, you're comparing, with the particular comparisons, you're comparing the quality. This is better than that. In more, I've got more than you. We're comparing an amount, something particular in all those cases. So sometimes we compare things, some specific quality, some particular quality. Sometimes we make a comparison, but it's not said what's being compared. That's the general comparison. More examples are coming, right? Now we'll go back, though, and cycle through again. This, I think, sometimes is the best way to do it, right? To talk about the general. This is the kind of time where you might want to take a break, for example. What I've done is talk about three types of comparison. Three types of reference: personal, demonstrative, comparative. Let me summarize on that. Personal, demonstrative, comparative. And then I said that these are all words where they don't mean a lot on their own, where you have to look around in order to find out exactly how to interpret them. If you have to look back, it's called Anaphoric Reference. If you have to look forward, it's called Cataphoric Reference. If you have to look out of the text, it's called Exophoric Reference. So that's what we've seen so far. Now we're going to look at some... So I think that's the good thing to make a list of, what I just said there, right? Reference, personal, demonstrative, comparative. How do we describe these words? Well, they can be exophoric or anaphoric or cataphoric. That's the base that you should have before going on to look at some more details about these. And in fact, I'm going to pause for a minute, pause the machine so I can have a drink of water because I've been talking a lot. One moment. So some additional details about personal reference. One very useful thing about personal reference is that it can refer to those things I said earlier, to people, right, or to animals, but it's got some special uses, particularly this one, which is probably the most common one, right? In most texts, it is not only the most common reference, but sometimes it's the most common word in a lot of texts, right? Because it can refer to, well, here, let's see some examples, right? It can refer to people. It's called a personal reference. It sounds weird, because of course it would be rude to say, do you know it, when you should say, do you know her, do you know him? But we do it sometimes, right? When you say, you wouldn't say that, but you say things like, who was that? It was Alice. So here you've called Alice it, and that doesn't seem rude. And on the telephone, right, you say, who is it? Right? And the other person doesn't say, don't call me it, right? So sometimes it is okay for people. But when it's used very commonly is to refer to longer sections of the text, not just to a thing like, do you want it, and I'm holding a pen, where it just means something simple, the pen, or even who is it, where it refers to something simple like a person, right? Look at it here. Curtsy, so this is Alice in Wonderland, right? And the Queen's talking. Curtsy while you're thinking what to say, it saves time. Alice wondered a little at this, but she was too much in awe of the Queen to disbelieve it. Look at how it, in the first case, it doesn't just mean like a table or a pen or even a person. It refers to this whole process, right? Curtsying while you're thinking what to say saves time, right? So it refers to the whole previous clause, in other words, the whole previous sentence. Curtsy while you're thinking what to say, curtsying while you're thinking what to say saves time. And then the next one, you can pause to read these, but that's what I just said, right? This extended reference, it refers to more than just a noun or a noun phrase, right? Like the pen, the table. Alice, right? Who is it? It's Alice. That's a noun. The pen is a noun phrase. Here it refers to more than that. And in fact, it can keep going, right? Because now you'll see that, look at how the blue it refers to even more now. Alice wondered a little at this, but she was too much in awe of the Queen to disbelieve it. What does the it mean here? The whole thing now. Alice wondered a little at this, but she was too much in awe of the Queen to disbelieve that curtsying while you're thinking what to say saves time. So now the blue it refers to the first sentence, curtsy, and the second sentence, it saves time. And you could keep going, right? You could keep using it to refer to more and more of the text, which is of course very convenient because it allows us to save time. And in fact, it's easier for our brains to manage, right, than to keep repeating everything. If I had to keep repeating everything, it would take forever until I could add the new thing and your brain would lose track of what's going on. Whereas I say it and your brain does this wonderful thing of quickly saying, what does it mean here? How is it interpreted here? Anaphoric, cataphoric, exophoric, and your brain makes sense of it for you, and quickly you realize that the blue it means curtsying while you're thinking what to say saves time. So, and that's really what I'm doing here, right? I mean, these are all things that you do regularly. You use references, of course, all the time when you talk and write. And I'm saying, but how do we describe what your brain is doing and what the other person's brain is doing when she listens to you and he reads what you've written? How do they make sense of it? How do they interpret it? So extended text reference is very common, a very common use of it in particular. You could probably do it here yourself now. Pause and look at the its and figure out what they mean. Figure out how these its are interpreted. You can ask me about that later if you want to. I'm not going to discuss them here. If you can't figure it out, you can ask me. Generalized Exophoric Reference. Big long name, not very difficult to understand though. You know, exophoric means it refers to something outside of the text. And general means general here, not something specific, right? So, think of the difference between the red U and the blue U here. After you've thought about that for a moment, you'll realize that the red U refers to Dave, right? Dave, you shouldn't smoke. U specifically refers to Dave. But if you hear things like 10 reasons you shouldn't smoke, or read it in this case on an NHS pamphlet, you know it doesn't, I mean, you're the one reading it, 10 reasons you shouldn't smoke, but you know it doesn't just mean you. In fact, it means anyone who reads this pamphlet. In fact, it means anyone at all, right? What it really means here, the you, is everyone. 10 reasons everyone shouldn't smoke, 10 reasons no one should smoke. It's the blue U that's a generalized exophoric reference. It refers generally to everyone who might ever read it. Sometimes we use the word one in that case. 10 reasons one shouldn't smoke. That often sounds a bit formal, overly formal. It's especially less common in North America than it is in Britain to use one in that way, but that's what you're doing, right? U refers to Dave specifically. Blue U is a generalized exophoric reference that refers to anyone generally. You can think of other examples of that. You know, if one never knows what might happen, one there is a general reference. Who? No one knows what's going to happen, right? I heard the librarian when my daughter was young say something like, "Children, we don't run in the library." Now, she said, "we don't run," but did she really just mean I, the librarian, and you children? We know that actually she means generally everyone, right? No one should be running in the library. So when she says, "we don't run in the library," she doesn't really mean us that are here right now. She means no one should run in the library. Generalized exophoric reference. Could refer to anyone generally, and we know who by thinking about outside of the text, right? Library. Supposed to be quiet, supposed to be calm, supposed to be safe. So we can say that, you know, I as an adult listening here, we don't run in the library. I know that she means no one should at all, not just the specific children that she's addressing at the time. Some more, remember now we're at the more advanced level, I think, of these concepts, some more advanced points about demonstrative reference. You've got some, they're all selective. You have to choose, are they near or far, right? The demonstrative references, are they near or far? Some of them refer, some of them are singular and some of them are plural. This and these are, this and that are singular. These and those are plural. This and these are near, that and those are far. I've added in here and there and now and then as it says circumstance. All it means is that they're the extra bits of information, right? You have to say things like words like this and that, these and those. It says participant. We use, I won't go into it too much now, but we use these, this, that, these, those. We use them to refer to things like I did before. Do you want this? That one is the best. We use them to refer to things that are, you can think of them as participating in the action, right? In other words, either the subjects or the objects of the verb, but instead of having to say subjects or objects, you can just say participants. Whereas the circumstances are the extra information. Where is it happening? When is it happening? You know, you need participants to make sense in language, right? You have to say something like, I like you. You need the I and the you participant, and you need the verb like. If I just say I like, it's not enough. I like what, right? If you just say like you, that doesn't seem like enough. The circumstances are the extra information, right? So when you say something like, you should go, that's enough, right? It's got the you participant. I can add more information. You should go now. The now is an optional extra. You should come. You should come here, right? The here can be added in as some extra, but you don't need it. You can say you should come. You should come here. Adds in a bit of extra that you can omit and still have something that grammatically makes sense. So that's all this is pointing out. There's different types both this way and different types both that way. Different ways to describe these. The, as we said before, is not selective because you don't know whether it's close or far, right? Head versus modifier, described this earlier. Here's another example. I hope this works for you. Sometimes to see things, have time to think about it, and then see another one. I think you can see the difference now, that in both of these cases, that is a demonstrative reference. It points at something. It's a selective demonstrative reference. You have to choose, is it close or far? If we're standing in the garden, and I said, that's a big garden, you'd probably look for a different garden, right? If we're standing in the garden, and I want you to look at it, I'd say, this is a nice garden, the one we're in, right? That is a big garden, you're probably going to look away from us. The meaning, though, doesn't change whether you say that is a big garden or that garden. That, in both cases, is a selective demonstrative reference. The only difference with head and modifier, as I said before, that as a head means it's on its own. That as a modifier means it goes with the garden. The main thing here is the garden, that garden. Think of that as a modifier just like any other kind of modifier. That big garden is very nice. What other types of gardens are there, right? That English garden is very nice, things like that. That's all that modifier means, right? It's a convenient way of saying, I mean, I realize that you could say adverb, adjective, demonstrative reference. You could be more specific. Modifier is a way of summarizing all of those together, right? You don't always, sometimes you want to say this is an adjective, that's an adverb. Sometimes it doesn't matter which one it is. All you want to do is say whether it's the main part of the phrase, the head, or whether it's something extra, the modifier. So it can be convenient, it saves you time, right? To not have to distinguish between different types of modifier just to say something is a modifier. Exophoric reference, we saw earlier, things like pick those up, right? You might point, pick those up. It might be the noise, something drops to the ground, and the parent says, pick those up, please. And the those is obvious because they just drop to the ground. So it's not always necessary to use physical pointing, right? It could be the pointing of the pointing is obvious because of the sound. How would you like to own that car? I might point, I might wave my head. It might just be that the car went driving by us. And so I say, how would you like to own that car? And you'd interpret that by looking around and say, oh, the car that just went by us must be the one that he refers to because it's the most salient one, the most obvious one to interpret that in this case. Leave that there and come here, right? I mean, you've got that, there, here are all exophoric references, right? And yet, if you were with me and we were talking, this would probably make sense. As it is now, leave that there and come here. You know those English words, but you can't interpret what is to be left where and where here is, although you'd probably take here as meaning where I am at the moment, but that would be kind of strange when we're talking over a video, right? But when you watch this, I won't be here. So you realize, leave that there and come here is not interpretable without being actually somewhere for it to make sense. In general, as I said before, this, these, and here, and now for that matter, mean close to the speaker. This, these, and here mean close in space. Now means close in time. That, those, and there mean farther away, right? And then means farther away in time. It doesn't really tell you anything about whether it's close to the listener or not. That's one case where English is weaker than many languages. A lot of languages have 3 forms of demonstrative reference. One to mean near me, this. One to mean near you, and one to mean not near me or near you. Right? In English, that can mean both not near me but near you, or not near me and not near you, and you don't know which one, right? Other languages, Like here with koko, soko, and asoko mean, koko is near Japanese, in Japanese rather. Koko is near me, soko is, over there, nearer to you, and asoko will not near me or near you, but some other place, right? Perhaps you can think of other languages and determine whether or not they are richer in that sense, like Japanese, or whether they're poorer, like English, right? Poorer and richer in the sense of having more or less options. You can give me some examples later, please. I'm always interested to hear about what you know about other languages and how it compares to English, right? So in other words, we can say that this is more specific because this means near me, whereas that only means not near me, but it could be anywhere else, right? And other near ones, so these, now, here, these are all more specific than their counterparts that are more distant, right? Their, that, and so on. An interesting thing is, so far I've just been talking about in terms of physical distance, but we can also see that this works in terms of distance in the text, which may sound weird to think of distance in the text, but I think you'll recognize that if you look at these examples. So if I say something like, there seems to have been a mistake, this is what I can't understand, there's a this. Now look, if I'm talking to my wife and I say, there seems to have been a mistake, and she says, yes, that's what I can't understand. It's not that you couldn't switch these, but why does, when I'm talking myself, this seems more appropriate, but when she's talking, that seems more appropriate? Well, it's because we're thinking of, here your brain is probably interpreting this in terms of textual difference. Things I say are this, right? Listen to this, and then I talk. Whereas if I say, listen to this, my wife would say, I know that. It's not here the physical distance. It doesn't matter if we're on the telephone far away or if we're standing side by side. She uses that to talk about something that I'm saying. I know that. I've heard that. That's what I can't understand. So it's not really something to term always. It's convenient to say, do you want this pen? Do you want that pen? And think of it as physical distance. But actually, we also use it with these ideas of distance in our head in terms of textual distance. Who said it or who thought it? This is the example that I just gave, right? Close to me this, listen to this thing that I'm going to say, listen to this thing that I'm going to say. I've already heard that thing that you said. Time as well. We tend to use this for present and sometimes future, that for past, right? You can see examples here. This is our first time going out in a month. We're there now. This will be our first time in months. Close future, tonight, right? Whereas that, there's no exact time where we switch, but we seem to eventually switch to that. Let's go to a film next week. This will be fun. Let's go to a film next week. That will be fun. Yeah, next week feels like that, whereas tonight seems like this. The past is pretty much always that, right? We went to a film. That was our first time in months. No, you don't have to worry about there being some exact time which we switch. Maybe you can figure it out. I can't. But there's definitely patterns, right? We shouldn't, maybe I won't call them rules because it's not like you must do it, but they're patterns in the sense that we tend to do them. All that's meant here is the cat's trying to, there's a cat trying to get in. Oh, that cat. Oh, that animal. Oh, that thing. Oh, that one. You can see here that really the important part of this is the word that. It's the one that does the pointing. It doesn't matter if you say, oh, that creature, oh, that thing. It's not even necessary. Oh, that again? You don't even need the cat, animal, thing, one part, right? It's the that that's the pointing word, and the cat, animal, thing, one. The actual noun here is the extra bit in terms of meaning. Although it might give you some nuance in terms of the person's opinion, right? Someone says, oh, that cat sounds nicer than, oh, that thing. We still know it's pointing at the particular animal, although thing sounds more negative, right? Extended reference, you saw with it, how it could refer to a whole sentence or multiple sentences. You can see the same thing happens with one of the demonstratives. You could probably pause and think about it for a minute. This, that, these, those, here, there, now, then. Which one of those 8 words can you use to refer to longer portions of the text? He broke a Chinese vase, that was valuable. As opposed to he broke a Chinese vase, that was careless. What's the difference between red that and blue that? Think about which one refers to what, and then think about which one is actually the extended reference, right? And of course, you'll have it by now that red one refers to the vase, right? He broke a Chinese vase. The Chinese vase was valuable. The red that refers to the noun phrase, to a simple thing, right? Whether it's vase or Chinese vase, it refers to one simple thing. Whereas the blue that refers to the whole process, right? To the whole clause, not to one physical thing, but to the whole action, right? He broke a Chinese vase, that was careless. You're saying him breaking the Chinese vase was careless, right? Or sometimes it works to think of it as the fact that, right? The fact that he broke a Chinese vase was careless. You can see that it refers to an extended part of the text. So that's why it, as a personal reference, and that as a demonstrative reference are so common in spoken and written language in English. Sometimes non-native English speakers say, that's, you guys say it all the time. It, that. Well, yeah, because we use it to refer to not just physical things, right? It, it the pen, or it the table, or it the chair, or it the window, but to processes and facts, right? And to summarize them all into one convenient little 2 or 4 letter word, it, that, is so useful and thus so productive. We do it so much. As it says here. You got to distinguish here between that as a demonstrative reference that's pointing at someone and that as a relative pronoun that's just a grammar thing. And I'm going to say it briefly now, but we'll talk more about it, relative pronoun at a different time. But look at one of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. If you try to turn the red that into a demonstrative reference, if you try to make it point at something, you won't be able to. This, that, the red that is a relative pronoun. It's a pronoun that relates. You're connected to your relative, that joins things. What does it join here? What you're saying in this case is something like this. You're saying one of the jurors had a pencil, the pencil squeaked. And you're jamming those 2 sentences together. You're relating the 2 of them into one sentence by doing one of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. And so you can see the pattern, right? That it's that appears right after the thing that it relates to here, and you could hear the pronunciation. When it's a relative pronoun, you can say that, right? One of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. One of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. But when you're using that as a demonstrative reference, you can't pronounce it as that, or at least it would sound very odd, right? We say, give me that. To say, give me that, sounds very odd, right? Give me that. Try it out. If you have to say that, you're looking at a demonstrative reference. If you can say it as that or that, the reduced pronunciation, you're looking at a relative pronoun, right? One of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. So that's a very useful way that your pronunciation shows you about the importance of it, right? That as a demonstrative reference means something. That as a relative pronoun is a grammatical function word that joins things. It doesn't have any meaning, it just does a grammatical job. And so our brains and our pronunciation system know that, and they allow us to say one of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. Yes. You can probably see that yourself here by looking at these examples and thinking about how you could pronounce the red that, right? You can work through the process if you want, but think, you could say the people that left early were first. The people that left early were first. Whereas B, the people who wanted that left early. The people who wanted that left early, no, that doesn't work, right? Or again, it's possible to say it, but it sounds odd, right? Sorry, just adjusting my monitor. So that in A is a relative pronoun, that in B is a demonstrative reference. The, as I said before, it's a demonstrative reference, it's selective, but you don't know how far away it is. You know it's something specific, right? If I say I'll meet you at the library, you know it's some particular library, but you don't know, it's not like if I say I'll meet you at this library, you'd expect it to be one close by, right? Other than that, there's not much to say about the differences. And so we'll just move on. Here, now, here, there, now, and then, these demonstratives, but that are extras, as I said, right? They're circumstances. In this case, they're a circumstance adverb. It doesn't matter if you use those terms or not. The important thing is to call them demonstratives. Here, there, now, and then. You do have to make that choice, right? Look at the cat. The cat says, "You'll see me there." So in other words, some place farther away from where we are now, right? The cat had to choose, am I meeting you somewhere close to me or far from me? Far, right? And later. Proximity to the speaker and distance from the speaker, right? Here, proximal, there, distal. There's another one of these funny little things where you want to determine, like with that having the role of a demonstrative reference or a relative pronoun, you've got the same thing happening with there. And you can use the same trick that I just showed you with pronunciation, right? What we have here with the red there and the blue there, a way of describing this, we have the same form, right? It's T-H-E-R-E. They both have the same form. In pronunciation, they sound the same, there and there. But they have different functions, and that's something that I talk about several times in this module and that you should be aware of, right? It's often what seems to happen is we like to have one word, one form, have multiple functions. That seems easier for the human brain than to have a different form for each function. In other words, we use one word for more than one purpose, rather than having a different word for each purpose. And of course, when you talk, you know which one you're using. I mean, you use them correctly, but what you have to do here is describe them, right? Which of these two, the red and the blue, which one is pointing and which one is not pointing? Even if you may try to make it point, but it's not, trust me. And I'll show you what it is in a minute. I think you can get it by now, right? When you have the red there, you'll see me there. There is a demonstrative reference. It means at that place, right? You'll see me at the restaurant. You'll see me at the Queen's croquet game. You'll see me in the university lobby, whatever. The blue there is not doing that job. And you can probably hear it in the pronunciation. Notice with the blue there, you can say something like there. You can say, "There's a man at the door. There's a man at the door." You can reduce the pronunciation. You can't do that with the red one. "You'll see me there." Doesn't sound right. It feels like we have to say, "You'll see me there. You'll see me there. You'll see me there." Maybe. "You'll see me there" sounds a lot more satisfying, right? "There's a man at the door." You can use a contraction even. "There's a man at the door." The blue there is not a demonstrative reference. It's just because we need a subject, and so we use the word there. But really what you're saying is this, right? A man at the door exists, right? When you say there are 3 reasons, you're just saying 3 reasons exist. Or you say there were 3 reasons, you're saying 3 reasons existed. There are 3 reasons, there's 3 reasons, that sort of thing. Don't try to make that point. If you go, there's a nice smell in the air. Don't try to make there's a nice smell in the air. Don't try to point at the smell in the air. You're just saying a nice smell in the air exists. That is not a demonstrative reference. You can call it an existential there. That there just means that something exists. Notice it always comes with that pattern there and a to be verb. There is, there are, there were. That's the typical pattern. There and a verb that shows existence doesn't point at anything, it just means existence, right? You can have both, right? In one sentence, you could say something like, there's a taxi over there. There's a taxi. Did I write it down? Yeah, I did. There's a door over there, right? There's a door over there. The red there tells you where the door is. That's a demonstrative reference. The blue there just means that a door exists over there, right? And like I said about the stress, you can say there's a door over there, but you can't say there's a door over there, right? The demonstrative reference has the stressed pronunciation. The existential there can be stressed or unstressed. Not much time left. Well, still a few. You're doing well, bear with me. We're going to talk about comparative references and then we'll be finished. Short break for me to have a sip of my drink, sorry. For comparative reference, you've got the organizational chart laid in front of you here. There are quite a few different subtypes. Let's start by looking at particular comparison, which, as I said in my introduction to it, was probably the easier of the two. You're always comparing one thing by referring to another thing. This tree is taller than that tree. You think of it as you always got A and B being compared on some sort of scale. Here you have this tree is A, that tree is B, and the scale is tallness, right? Here you've got this tree A being compared to 10 feet, so being compared to a unit on a scale again of height, of tallness, right? I'm saying tallness instead of height because it is, you're comparing the tall, right? Because there's other ways to compare height, short, right? So you're on a scale of tall, A is more than B tree. On a scale of tall, A is more than B 10 feet. That's what you're always doing. And you can't just say this tree is taller than, or this tree is taller. You need something, right? I mean, if you say that's a tall tree, and then I can say this tree is taller, well, yeah, you said one part of it, and I said the other part, right? I don't have to say the whole thing myself. I can refer to something you said. That's fine, right? But you can't just say this tree is taller without it causing confusion. And that's just what I've said. You can read it if you want. Now, sometimes we do make the comparisons implicit. We don't actually say what we're comparing to, right? If you look at sooner here, I saw this on the tube. Help beat kids cancer sooner. They don't say sooner than what, but here it's easily interpretable, right? I mean, if I say this tree is taller, you'd be thinking, well, taller than what? Taller than the house, taller than the tree, taller than whatever. Not necessarily clear. Help beat kids cancer sooner is pretty easy to interpret. Cancer is bad. We want to stop it as quickly as possible. So help beat kids cancer sooner would easily be interpreted as beat kids cancer sooner than we are doing now, right? Because it's obvious that it's going to refer to sooner than now, because you wouldn't say sooner than we did in 1842 or something. You wouldn't compare it to anything else than now, because we know that it's from our knowledge of the world, we can easily determine that cancer is a bad thing, and we're always trying to beat it sooner than before. So you'd easily interpret that. Whereas this tree is taller, there might be more than one option that aren't so obvious, and so we really need it, right? So references can be implicit like this, but they're usually easily interpretable. Advertisers use them a lot, right? When you buy things, package of cereal, now bigger. You might just say now bigger than it was before, right? Now new improved recipe, better than what? It's got more salt, so it's better because it tastes better. They got less salt, so it's better for your health. They leave it, sometimes that's the purpose of the advertising, is to leave the reference unsaid so that you, the reader, make the interpretation yourself. You can make whichever, they hope that you'll make whichever reference is, whichever interpretation is better for you, better to sell it to you. Particular comparisons can also be numbers. Rather than comparing a particular quality, tall or better or sooner, you can compare numbers, right? There are twice as many people there as last time. So the number of people A is being compared to the number of people last time B. In terms of number, how many? Twice, right? You're still comparing something specific, the number. Here you're comparing not the number but the quality, right? He's a better man. We're being compared in terms of goodness. These are just them. If you want to picture how you'd write it out, if you're saying the whole thing, there are twice as many people as the number of people who were there the last time. He's a better man than the man that I am. You're saying something like that. A few more examples. It must be a really big dog, bigger than you think. What's being compared here? You're actually making a comparison of the really small dog to the dog that you imagine, right? It's not even comparing a real dog, but it's still a comparison, right? There's the dog you're thinking about and the actual dog are being compared. Dog A that you think and dog B, the actual dog, are compared in terms of size, in terms of how big they are. Here, the same sort of thing. It's not, it's not always physical things, tree and tree, right? Apparently Brown resigned when his proposal was rejected. I wish he could have acted less hastily. Think about how that's being compared. Something that happened, how quickly he resigned, is being compared to an idea, how quickly I wish he resigned, right? A, how quickly he resigned. B, how quickly I wish he resigned is being compared in terms of speed, haste. So the comparisons, this happens, right? When I give examples, I often refer to physical things because it's easier. This pen, that pen, the tall tree, the taller tree, things like that. But really, we use language much more productively, in much more complex ways than that. Here, you're making comparisons between actual things that exist, small dog and his resignation, with things that don't exist, that are counterfactual, but that we wish had happened or that we thought about, right? The dog in your head, my wish for how quickly he resigned. General comparison is the one that I mentioned earlier as sometimes being tricky because people don't realize a comparison is being made. A comparison is being made, but you're not saying in terms of what, right? With identity, similarity, and difference, you're only comparing two things. Think of it as a scale. You can say this cat is the same as that cat. This cat is the same as that cat. This cat is different than that cat. Or this cat is similar to that cat. Now, in all of those cases, you're comparing the two cats, but you're not saying what it is that's the same or similar or different about them, right? This cat is the same as that cat could refer to the species, right? Or the type, I don't know what the correct word is, right? They're both Siamese cats. Now, it's obviously not same in all ways. One might be bigger than the other one. One might be smaller than the other one, right? They're older, younger, right? Friendlier, nastier. But you could still say this is the same cat as that one. And it's left to the listener to decide how you're saying they're the same. Oh yeah, they're both Siamese, but clearly that one's bigger and older and friendlier. Or this cat is different than that cat. Well, what's different about it? I mean, they both have 4 legs, they both look like cats, but there's something different about them, right? So in all of these cases, you're making a comparison. Think of it as always on that scale, a continuum. Same, different, similar. This is one of those places where English is, again, other languages have more possibilities here. We tend to, in English, we have same, different, and similar you probably picture as being down towards same. But we don't have a word that means down towards different, right? I mean, we can use constructions to say that. We can say they're not entirely different. We can say things like that, but we don't have one particular word, right? Where some languages have same, similar, close to same. A word here that means different, close to different, but not entirely different, and then we have different to mean entirely different. Some examples, it's the same cat as the one we saw yesterday, right? Think of how all of these work. They're all comparisons, In the case of C, we're saying it's two different cats. In the case of B, we're saying it's two different cats, although they share some characteristics. In the case of A, this is the one that people sometimes don't see that it's a comparison, but it is, right? You're comparing the cat yesterday to the today and determining that they are in fact one cat. So it's still a comparison. What cat was it yesterday, cat A? What cat was it yesterday, cat B? A and B are in fact the same cat. So saying something is the same as something else is a comparison, right? And it doesn't mean that in this case you probably think it is the same cat. But you can say that, which pen do you want? Oh, they're all the same. Well, now clearly all pens are not the same pen. There's not only one pen, but you may mean, well, the same function, right? Oh, they're all the same. So that they may be different sizes, different colors, different ages, different prices. But when you say they're all the same, I'd interpret that as, oh, you're comparing all the pens in some way. I guess you mean in terms of function, they all write. So I just give you any particular pen at my choice. That's how a general comparison is different than the other type, than the specific comparison, right? Specific comparison, the speaker or writer chooses the thing that will be used for the basis of comparison. Tall, short, better, twice as many, the number. With a general comparison, the speaker or writer only says same, similar, different, and how they're being compared is left up to the listener or reader to determine. Like all the others, comparison is referential, right? You can't just say it's the same or it's different or it's similar. There has to be something to compare it to, something to refer to. Different from, similar to, identical to. You need that other point of comparison. Here's a few more examples that I think you can probably work out yourself now, right? We have received exactly the same color report as the report that was submitted 2 months ago. The report we've received A is being compared to the report we received 2 months ago, B, and they're being compared in terms of color, same, and so on. I'll leave you to look at the other two for a minute and then determine the answers on your own, or, well, you'll see on the next slide. If you want to look at them yourself, try them out, look on the next slide, and you'll be able to find the answers yourself. So, that's the end. I know there are a lot of concepts there. Starting from the top and working your way down, you should have a picture of reference. At the next level, you should be able to remember personal, demonstrative, and comparative reference. You should be able to remember that all references can be either exophoric, or meaning they're understood from interpreting them from outside of the text, or they can be understood from inside the text, in which case they are anaphoric or cataphoric. And then from there on, I won't go through all of the more specific details, but you really should be familiar with and able to use those terms: personal reference, demonstrative reference, comparative reference, exophoric, anaphoric, and cataphoric. If you've got all those for now, you've got a good base from which to continue, and you can learn more about the rest in the readings, of course, and by asking me when time permits in the seminars. Good. Thank you very much. Bye.